I've analyzed hundreds of SAT punctuation questions from actual tests in order to find out what is the theoretical fastest way to solve every single punctuation question with 100% accuracy. And in doing so, I managed to build a super simple algorithm that's just plug and play. It's just if you see this, do this, that you can follow along with, which will allow you to solve every single punctuation question with 10 seconds on average with 100% accuracy. And that's what we'll go over in this video. Here is the agenda for today. We're first going to go over how to identify independent clauses fast. And I'm willing to bet that my method is completely different from how you solve it, and my way is way faster as well. Then we're going to go over the 6 punctuation marks on the SAT. There are really only 6 that you need to know, and I'm going to go over specifically how to know when or when not each one of them is correct. Then we're going to go over how to solve different punctuation question types. So we're going to go over shortcuts and other things, as well as which answer choice is more likely to be correct when you're looking at the answer choices. That's super helpful. It saves tons of time. Then we're going to go over my exact process that I use to solve every single punctuation question holistically. And then we're going to go over example questions to really drill in everything like this. And this is probably the most important part of the video. I'm going to first try to break your belief that finding independent clauses is easy. So I want you to read through these 3 and figure out, are these independent clauses or are they not independent clauses? And these are going to be hard. About 80% of students get these wrong the first time. So take your time, pause the video, spend about 30 seconds, read through them, figure out, are these independent clauses or are they not? Hopefully you have time to figure these out. I'm going to tell you the answer. So do that if you haven't figured them out yet. Okay. All 3 of these are independent clauses. And if that shocked you, you should definitely watch the next part. And if that didn't shock you, you should still watch the next part, because what I'm going to tell you will help you a lot. Either way, for something to be an independent clause, it needs to have 3 things. First thing, it has to have a subject. This is pretty much always, as it is always on the SAT, it is always at the beginning of the independent clause. Okay, it's always at the beginning, so it's really easy to find. Just like look at the beginning of the independent clause. For example, the boy who ran across the street was the subject. The boy. Okay, what's doing the action? That's the subject. The second thing is one main verb. Okay, I call it a main verb because it's the main action the subject does. Notice that there are 2 verbs in the sentence, ran and fell. What is the main action the boy's doing? Okay, hopefully just understand the sentence. You can tell it's fell. Okay? What did this boy do? They fell. Okay, this is more extra information about the boy, like who ran across the street. This is to tell you about the boy, like which boy was it? Okay, but what did the boy actually do? They fell. So fell is the main verb here, the main action the boy did. And this usually comes from understanding the sentence as a whole. However, I will tell you all the possible reasons why something is not a main verb, so you can tell for sure. Okay, first things first is if it's an ing verb. So just any verb that had an ing. Like for example, if it said running, we know for sure that's not a main verb because it has an ing attached at the end. So if the verb has an ing at the end, then it is definitely not a main verb for sure. Okay. Same thing if there is a to in front of it. So if it's an infinitive, okay, if there's a to in front of it, then it's not a main verb. So it said to run, that is guaranteed to not be a main verb. You can just for sure eliminate it to be, just know for sure it's not a main verb. Okay. The last thing is verbs in a noun or in extra info. So for in extra info, this is a great example. Notice the boy who ran across the street. Ran is in the extra info of who ran across the street. Okay, yeah, like we said before, this is extra information about the boy. So if a verb is inside some extra information, you can tell it's by understanding the sentence. Okay, like this is the subject, this is the main action, this was extra information about something. If it's extra information, then any verbs in there is for sure not a main verb. Okay, and what do I mean by verbs in a noun? The exercise we did earlier is a great example of this, so let's do this now. Let's read the first one. That the ancient ruins held secrets lost to time fascinated archaeologists for centuries. This is a noun. It's the subject, actually. That the ancient ruins held secrets lost to time. The idea that the ancient ruins held secrets lost to time, that idea, it fascinated archaeologists for centuries. Okay, so what is the main verb here? The main verb is fascinated. Okay, it's the idea that what action did the subject do? Again, the subject was the idea that ancient ruins held secrets lost to time. That idea, it fascinated archaeologists for centuries. Okay, so this idea fascinated archaeologists for centuries. Hopefully that's clicking. Okay, this is the subject. And notice held, there's 2 verbs here, held and fascinated. However, held is not the main verb here because it's part of a noun. Okay, again, this is the subject. The subject has to be a noun or a pronoun, by the way. So held is the subject. I mean, it's part of the subject. It's part of the noun. So that can't be the main verb. It's literally part of the thing that does the main verb. Okay, like what does it actually do? It fascinated archaeologists. So that's the main verb. Okay, so if two things, right? If the verb is inside extra info, like we said earlier, the boy who ran across the street, that's extra info about the boy. Or if it's part of a noun, for example, in this case, if the verb was just part of an idea that did something, okay, then that verb is not a main verb. Okay, what about two? Okay, determining whether the ancient manuscript was authentic required extensive analysis. So see if you can find what the main verb is and what the subject is. Okay, obviously there's three verbs here. Okay, determining, was, and required. Hopefully you can identify what verbs are. If you can't, then I would search up like how to identify what verbs are. It's the action that it's just an action. Okay, if it's an action, then it's. By the way, was, were, is, are, those are all it's the same thing. Be, like those are all verbs. Okay, determining, that's an ing verb. Okay, let me write this. So ing verbs, what we know is definitely not a main verb. Like definitely not. Okay, ing, any of the two. If in extra info or in a noun, okay, or in a noun, then we know it's not a main verb. Everything else is a main verb, by the way, guaranteed. Okay, determining, that's an ing verb. It's not a main verb. What are the other verbs in here? Was and required. Okay, whether the ancient manuscript was authentic, that is part of the noun. That's part of the subject. Okay, like the I guess the action of determining whether the ancient manuscript was authentic, like the idea of that action, what does that do? That required extensive analysis. So the required is the main verb here. Okay, was, which is a verb, but that's part of this idea. I know that might not sound like, and same thing for this one too. This one definitely, at least to me, this one does not sound like an independent clause. I think most of you find independent clauses by seeing if it can stand on its own, which is not going to work every single time for the SAT. There will be times where it doesn't sound like it can stand on its own, but it's actually an independent clause. So you have to be able to use this method of just looking for a subject and the main verb and making sure, or which I'll go over later, there's no dependent clause starter. Okay, last thing, let's go over this third one. Whether these vocalizations should truly be considered names and are used in a way that is comparable to human ones remains controversial among animal researchers. There are lots of verbs in here. See if you can find all the verbs, actually. Like count how many verbs and like have a number in your head how many verbs there are. But I'm gonna go over this. So whether these vocalizations should truly be considered. Okay, that's a verb. I count this as one verb, by the way. It's just like one thing. Okay. So truly be considered. That's one verb. That's an action. And are used, again, are, be, is, was, those are all verbs. So are used is another verb in a way that is comparable as another verb. So we have three so far. The humans ones remains, that's another verb. So there's four verbs in here. Okay, hopefully you got four. So like, if you couldn't do that, then you need to figure out, like you need to be able to identify verbs. So I think the tricky ones is, was, or, were, be, or like those. Okay, so if you can recognize those as verbs, I think it'd be fine. Everything else is very self-explanatory. Like obviously remains is a verb. Okay, but what's the main verb here? So, if you understood this, so this is kind of important, especially if it's a more complicated independent clause like this or complicated sentence, you have to understand it to figure out what is the subject. It's always at the beginning, by the way. But where does the subject end, right? And like what's the main verb? And by the way, the main verb is going to always be right next to the subject in the independent clause. So if you find out where the subject ends, the next thing is going to be the main verb. So if you can get good at that, it's going to be really fast. And I'll show you an example of how fast I can find independent clauses. But whether these vocalizations should truly be considered. So this is a question, right? More of a question of two things. Whether these vocalizations should be considered names and are used. So should it be this, and can it be used in this way? That's compared to human ones, right? It's two questions, right? That's the subject. It's just questions. What do these questions do? They remain controversial. Okay, so hopefully that makes sense. So this is the subject from here to here. Okay, all of this is part of a noun of like the question of whether this could be this and are used in this, right? So that's a question. What does this question do? What does this idea of a question do? It remains controversial. So this is the main one. So I think a good strategy, if you get stuck, is identify all the verbs and figure out which one is the action the subject does. And you have to find the subject. And these are hard ones, by the way. These are probably, if you can get these 3 right, then you can get anything right. At least for identifying what a independent clause is. But these are probably the hardest examples that you'll see. Okay. Now let's go over the last thing, which is, I think, pretty easy for most of you because you're English speakers, but it can't start with a dependent clause starter. Like there's no dependent clause starter at the beginning of the independent clause. Really quickly, let's go over what a dependent clause starter is. It's just any of these, which I think is pretty self-explanatory. This is the acronym WASABI. If you do this, by the way, this is not all the dependent clause starters. I think there's pretty much an infinite amount of dependent clause starters, so I can't go over all of them. But these are definitely the most common ones. I think the more common ones that you see, not the most common ones probably, but yeah, you get the idea. Okay, so you don't have to memorize this. Actually, don't memorize this. You should just be able to tell from the feel of it, of just, oh yeah, this is a dependent clause, and you can. It's pretty obvious, like if it starts with a dependent clause starter. Like I think it's extremely obvious. For example, if it's put a when here, let's insert a when here. This immediately does not sound like a sentence. Like when the boy who ran across the street fell. And then imagine somebody walked into a room and then said, when the boy who ran across the street fell, and then just stopped talking. People look really confused because you expect something to say something right after this, right? Yeah, because this is a dependent clause. We're not going to go with dependent clauses really, because I'm just going to treat it as additional information like everything else. But if you add the word when, if you add a dependent clause starter to an independent clause. So this is an independent clause, right? We identified there's a subject and there's a main verb. However, when we add a dependent clause starter to it, it's not an independent clause. If we add a when, if we add like a though the boy who ran across the street fell, that's not an independent clause anymore because of the though. I think it's extremely obvious, and if it's not, then it's just, you just do like 10 questions and it would become obvious to you. It's either good, it would be pretty obvious. Yeah, it's like if the boy who ran across the street fell, that's definitely a dependent clause. By far, the most common word that people think is a dependent clause starter, but actually isn't, is the word that. That is not a dependent clause starter in any world. By the way, it's just not. And I think if you do more of these questions, you get used to it. But I just save you lots of time because if you see the word that is not a dependent clause starter. That's usually like a start for additional information. Actually, not a dependent clause starter. Hopefully you understand by now that in order for something to be an independent clause, at the very beginning, there cannot be a dependent clause starter. Instead, it should be a subject, and right after the subject should be a main verb. And that's it. There are only 6 punctuation marks that you need to know for the SAT, and I'm going to go over all of them. The first one is a colon. And there's only one thing about a colon you need to worry about. And you notice I'm going to frame this in a way of what does it have to be in the passage for this punctuation mark to be correct. I don't care about what the punctuation mark actually does. Like I don't care what colon does actually. All I care about is what is the fastest way to figure out if this colon is correct by looking in the passage. When I ask people about a colon, most people say that colons introduce a list. That is extremely, extremely wrong. You have to get more questions wrong if you rely on this, okay? This is just wrong, at least on the SAT. The most important thing about colon actually is there has to be an independent clause before the colon. This is actually extremely important. I'm pretty sure it's like 95%. It's like a crazy amount. It's just like maybe only one question I've ever seen where this wasn't the case. If there's an independent clause before colon, that colon is right. It's just guaranteed to be correct. That's just what I've seen, by the way. But like again, I would still check the other part too. So there has to be an independent clause before, and expanding dots after the colon. And what I mean by expanding dot is it has to be its own dot. So for example, let's say I saw the 3 colors, yellow, red, and violet. Okay. So this is an independent clause. I saw, so that's the subject and the verb. So this is a independent clause before the colon. And after the colon, this expands on what the 3 colors were. So it expands on something right before the colon. Okay, so this is an example of a good use for a colon. And if you see this, basically it would look like maybe, it probably look like a blank, like this. And the answers would be like colors, and colon is one answer choice, and then colors, and like no punctuation another, and then colors, period, and another. Basically, for colon, it has to be independent clause before. And that's usually what's right, but also make sure that what's after it is an expanding dot. You kind of have to understand the sentence before it to figure out what's after it expands on the dot before. Okay, has to expand on something. It's really fake, honestly. And if it sounds like it expands on it, it's yeah, that's correct. And when I say expanding dot, it has to be its own dot too after the colon. So, for example, if you see this, this is wrong. Okay, this is not its own dot. Okay, I saw the three colors as yellow, red, and violet. The colon can't sound like it's interrupting something. Okay, it can't sound like it's interrupting the middle of a sentence. It has to be an independent clause, and then after it jumps straight into its own thought, the expanding thought about what's before it. As a colon, it's only one thing. It's super self-explanatory. Okay, next thing, period. Let's go over that. Period, you only need to worry about one thing. Independent clause before and independent. And I'm gonna teach you the order you check these answer choices in later on, so you don't have to get confused about like do I know it's a colon or period? Like how do I know? I'll teach you. All right, independent clause before. And independent clause after. I think it's pretty self-explanatory. If there's an independent clause before it and there's an independent clause after it, that's a period should go there. Okay, let's talk semicolons. Now, a semicolon, you actually have to worry about two things for a semicolon on the SAT. Okay, the first thing is a semicolon list. This is pretty important that you understand this. And then the second thing is an independent clause before and after, which is the exact same thing as what a period does. Okay. However, most people, they know that a semicolon does the same thing as a period, but they don't know about semicolon lists. So I'm going to explain about semicolon lists. This is actually really important. Before you even check for independent clauses before and after, you have to check for a semicolon list. Semicolon lists actually aren't that common at all. But it's really important that when you check for semicolons in general, you have to make sure that it's not a semicolon list question first before you check for independent clauses before and after. Because these are free questions when you do see them, and it's really important that you recognize them. So this is what a semicolon list question looks like. Let's first talk about what a semicolon list question is so you understand what I'm talking about. First of all, you should be able to recognize that this is a list of 3 items in this passage. Okay, it's a date, and then why that date was significant. And a date, and then why that date was significant. And a date, and like this thing happened on that date. So there's 3 items. Okay. Now, why can't we just separate all these items with a comma? Because you notice after this item ends, there's a semicolon there instead of a comma. Because normally we separate items in a list with a comma, right? Why is there a semicolon here instead of a comma? If there was a comma here, it would get really confusing. Okay, if it was just a comma, where does the items begin and end? Because there's a comma here, but there's also a comma here. This comma is actually not the separation of the item. So this comma is just there in the item itself. What's the difference between this comma and this comma? It's hard to tell, especially when you're just looking at it. When you try to understand like a really complicated passage, it's hard to tell. So in English, we use a semicolon as like a big comma to differentiate itself from the little comma in the item itself. So anytime there's already anytime there's already a comma in the item itself in a list, then you use semicolons to separate the items instead of a comma. If there wasn't commas, like if there wasn't a comma here and there wasn't a comma and it wasn't a comma, then you can use commas to separate everything because it wouldn't be confusing anymore. But because there's already a comma in here, you need a semicolon. Okay, but the SAT actually doesn't test you on the fact that that's the reason why you need semicolons. They test you on the placement of the semicolons. Should the semicolon be here or should the semicolon be here? Basically, they're testing you on where does the list begin, or where does the items in the list begin, and where does the items in the list end? And you need to figure that out and the place. Okay, so the item in the list ends right there. This is where the first item ends, so let me put a semicolon there. Or like the first item in the list ends right there, so I need to put a semicolon here. Like for example, like just that's what they test you on. Okay. So how do you recognize if it's a semicolon list question? It's actually pretty easy. You just anytime you see multiple semicolons, it's a good chance it's a semicolon list question. For example, if you see a semicolon already in the sentence the blank is in, that's a semicolon list question. If you see a semicolon and right next to each other, then it's a semicolon list question. If you see multiple semicolons in the answer choices, then semicolon list question probably. If you see like, oh, this answer is A has semicolon here, answer is B has semicolon here, that's pretty much semicolon list question. You have to be careful though. I have seen sometimes where the SAT tries to trick people and bait people where they put the blank like here, for example, before the list even starts. So you would think you have to pick the answer with a semicolon, but you actually can't because the semicolon didn't even start yet. So it's not a semicolon list question. Or they put the blank right here, and the semicolon list ended already. So it's not a semicolon list question anymore. You have to use like under punctuation marks instead of semicolon. Things like that. The answer to this is pretty obvious because it's right in the middle of a semicolon list. So you have to pick the only answer choice that has a semicolon because you know it's a semicolon list question and it's in the middle of a semicolon list, so like yeah, semicolon. And you can verify this too. I would verify it, by the way. I would read it and understand, okay, this is the structure of the item. This is called parallelism, by the way. You have to make all the items in the list look alike. So it starts with a date and then why that date was significant. Starts with a date and then why date was significant. And starts with a date. Okay, so because it starts with a date, that means there should be a semicolon right there. Right? So you have to, like, obviously, this last item begins right there. So you need a semicolon here. And that's why it's a semicolon there. Okay. Let's try this one. So pause this video, see if you can solve this one. First of all, you can recognize the semicolon list question because, oh yeah, semicolon, semicolon, the semicolon and, yeah, I'm pretty certain semicolon list question. Then you can just read it and find what the structure of items are. I always like to start with the last item in the semicolon list because it's really easy because you just see a semicolon and you need to read the last item and that will tell you what the structure of the other item should be. You read this, educating the public about plant conservation. Let's go to the next item. Fostering scientific research, growing diverse plant species. They all start with ing verbs. I think it's pretty clear then that we should put a semicolon right here because this one starts with ing verbs, so all of these should start with ing verbs. We should put a semicolon right there. Okay, which answer choice does that? It's B. Now you can solve this by seeing what sounds right, like growing diverse plant species. It makes logical sense actually that both native and non-native is applying information about the diverse plant species, right? It's additional information about that. It's not going to be additional information about fostering scientific research. It just makes sense. Like native, non-native, that's plant species. So you have to make the item end there so that this is actually the information about this and not about scientific research. But I think that's too slow and also takes a lot of brain power. Instead, just look at the last item. Yeah, so it's an ing verb. All these are ing verb. Most of the semicolon list questions, actually pretty much all of them, except for this question specifically, have to do with the structure, which I guess is also the structure, but have to do with like the placement of the commas. Oh, the item has to begin with the date it starts. Or it might be like, the item has to end where the date is, or like when it's like a movie title and then something about the movie and the movie title, so it has to always start right before the movie title. Things like that. Just figure out what does all the items look like, the structure of the items are, and then just match everything. And that's it. And it tests you on the placement of where the semicolon is. Like where does this item end? Where does this item begin? And you need to put a semicolon there. That's what tests you on. Okay, that's semicolon list questions. Now let's move on to the next thing, which is comma plus fanboys. Now you need to be careful because a lot of people forget about this. It's not that common, but you need to know this, okay? What is fanboys? Fanboys is an acronym for and, nor, but, or, yet, so. You need to memorize all this. I mean, it's pretty easy to memorize in my opinion, but actually no. On the SAT, I've only seen and but being tested. And but is actually extremely uncommon. I've only seen 2 questions that have to do with but on official and practice tests. Official ones. Don't come to me with like a Princeton review question and they had or, okay? That's not an official question. On official questions made by College Board, I've only seen and sometimes but, very few times, but it's pretty much always just an and. So you see a comma and an and. Okay, so you really need to only about and but. So if you see a comma right next to it, what I mean by comma plus fanboys is a comma and then right next to it is an and. Okay, I treat this as one punctuation mark actually. If you see a comma and together, that's comma plus fanboys. That's one punctuation mark. You only need to worry about one thing, and it does the exact same thing as a period. So same thing as a semicolon, I guess, for the second thing that semicolon does. Now that we know that there are 3 punctuation marks that do the exact same thing, the period, semicolon, and comma, fanboys, all of them have to have an independent clause before it, independent clause after it. We're going to do something pretty cool that saves lots of time. Let's say answer choice A had a period, and answer choice B had a semicolon in the exact same spot as the period, and answer choice C had a comma, fanboys in the exact same spot as all the other 2. Okay? And then there was answer D. I don't even care what answer D says. What's the answer? You could probably just pick D and it'd be 100% correct. The one exception to this is maybe the semicolon is separating items in a semicolon list, which is actually why I put this first. So when you see a semicolon, first thing you should do is just check if there's a semicolon list or not. And it's really easy. Just look at the passage and see if there's already a semicolon in the passage of the sentence the blank is in, then yeah, you should address the semicolon list. But if there isn't a semicolon list, and the only other reason why a semicolon could be correct would be linking independent clauses. Again, there's only two things. So if the semicolon list isn't there, the only other reason that the semicolon is correct is linking independent clauses. Then we know all three of these are the exact same thing. And since they're the exact same thing, we might as well just be seeing all periods here. Okay? This might as well, all periods down the line. Because the exact same thing. Right? You could just replace all these, completely interchangeable. At least on the SAT. I know in modern English it's probably different. But in the SAT, they are completely interchangeable. The exact same thing. There can't be three right answers. There can only be one right answer choice. If these three are the exact same thing, that means all three of these are wrong because there can't be three right answers. Then that means D has to be the answer then. Hopefully that makes sense. Okay, these are the exact same thing. Like a period, I can just swap this with a semicolon. It changes nothing. I can swap this with a comma fanboys. Nothing changes at all. Okay, like this is how it works on the SAT. Completely interchangeable. So you take advantage of that. I've only seen one question where you could actually do this. The more common one is there's two. Like you see a comma for fanboys and a period, then you can eliminate both of them. And be careful, they have to be in the exact same spot. If this period was over here, then it's a completely different story. This period is higher up than this comma fanboys. They're not the same thing anymore because they're not in the exact same spot. Okay, you have to make sure they're in the exact same spot in order to know that you can eliminate them. Okay, that's just a helpful thing that you can take advantage of. And again, just be careful. Don't just eliminate period and semicolon just because. Make sure there's no semicolon list for this. The College Board likes to trap people when they take advantage of this. So they purposely make semicolon list questions exist when there's a period and one of the answer choices too. Okay. Next thing, let's talk about an isolated comma. An isolated comma, this is just any comma that there's no fanboys after it. I just call it isolated comma to differentiate itself from a comma plus fanboys. Okay, so this is just any other comma, a comma by itself, basically. There's no comma and there's no fanboys after the comma. Okay. You have to worry about two things about an isolated comma. The first thing is a comma list. I'm not even going to go too in-depth into this. This is extremely self-explanatory. It's just a comma list. It's really easy to recognize this too. These are actually super rare to the point where I even hesitated to put this in here. It's super rare to the point where you only see maybe one comma list question out of 10 tests you take. It's that rare. But basically, if there's a list of more than two items, for example, let's just go to colors again. So yellow and red. So you actually wouldn't put any commas here because this is only a list of two items. Okay, this is a list of more than two items though. Then you need to put commas in between all the items. So yellow, blue, comma, and red. So now since there's three items, which is more than two, you need to put commas in between all the items. Okay, that's comma list. It's really easy to recognize too. You just look in the passage, oh, there's a bunch of commas. It's definitely a comma list, and then you can figure it out. Okay, second one. Attaching non-essential element. Now, this is super important. You have to understand this. So I'm going to go really in-depth into this and give you lots of examples. Okay. What do I mean by attaching non-essential elements? Let's start with an example. Let's say the strategy proved effective for learners. Okay. Let's say this is a sentence. And let's say I want to add a non-essential element. By the way, a non-essential element is just additional information. Okay. It's another word for additional information. Okay. Let's say I want to add, although usually overlooked by students. Okay, this is additional information about the strategy, right? Although usually overlooked by students. Let's say I want to add this to the beginning of the sentence. This gets confusing then. Like, what is this doing? How do you actually read this? Like, it's just confusing. Although usually overlooked by students, the strategy proved effective for learners, it's a mouthful. Especially when you start adding more additional information to this. That's why we need a comma here. Okay, when we're trying to attach additional information or non-essential elements to the sentence, wherever that non-essential element is touching the rest of the sentence, we need a comma there. Okay. Let's say I want to add additional information in the middle of the sentence, so smack dab in the middle. Let's say the strategy, I want to put made by James here. This is additional information about the strategy. It's right in the middle of the sentence. in order to attach it to the sentence, we need to put commas here and here. So again, wherever you add non-essential element, which again is additional information, wherever you add it, just look at where it's touching the rest of the sentence, and if it's touching the rest of the sentence there, you put a comma there, and that's it. So when you put a comma, this is like a comma sandwich now. You can obviously also add it to the end of the sentence. Let's say we want to add the non-essential element who eventually mastered the concept. I want to add this. In order to add this, we need a comma here, okay? Because it's touching the rest of the sentence right there, so we need to put a comma there. Another example, you can actually even put non-essential element inside a non-essential element. Let's say we want to put additional information about who here. Let's say despite struggling before they learned the strategy, I want to add this additional information to the sentence. This is additional information about who. In order to do this, I need to put a comma here and a comma here. Okay. That's how we use commas. You notice there's only two things that isolated comma does. And comma list is super rare. This is super rare. You basically never see this. And so if you do see this, it's pretty much always only going to be in the first module. Or if you get the easy second module, it's going to be there. But mostly watching this video is going to get the hard second module. And like really all you need to worry about when you see a comma by itself and there's no fanboys after it is this. Attaching non-essential elements. And that's all you have to worry about. The only reason why that comma is correct is it's non-essential element. So you just need to see if there's an answer choice with a comma. Let's say answer choice A was like the strategy. We're going to take this part and put that as answer choice A. Let's say this is answer choice A. And there's the blank. If there's a comma there, the only reason why that comma is correct is if there's a non-essential element somewhere around it, if it's attached to non-essential element. So all you have to do is just read around it and see if there's non-essential elements. And you say, oh, made by James, that's a non-essential element about strategy. So there should be a comma there. And if you can't find non-essential elements that's right to this comma, like either before or after it, then there shouldn't be a comma there. And that's the only reason why that comma is correct. And commas get people so confused. It's actually super easy because you just remember the only reason why a comma is correct is if it's attached to non-essential elements. And you just need to look for non-essential elements either before or after the comma. That's it. I'm going to give you some other things in terms of identifying non-essential elements because that's a big thing. Obviously, you need to be able to know if something's non-essential element or not when you're reading the sentence. So let's say this said the strategy that was made by James. Now you notice autocorrect said you can't put commas here. Yeah, this is the only exception to the non-essential element thing because essential element, that's what that is. Essential element. That's what word that does. It introduces essential elements. I'm sure there's more in modern English, but on the SAT, the only thing you need to worry about, the only exception to additional information not being non-essential is if there's the word that that's at the beginning of it. So if you see the word that, whatever the word that introduces as like additional information, there is no commas around it. And there's especially no comma right before that. So this is actually an ironclad rule on the SAT. There was never a comma before the word that. Okay, it was incorrect to put a comma here, ever. There's never commas here. So if you see a comma before that, you can eliminate it right away. There could be a comma here though, because maybe there's additional information right here, just like how there was additional information inside the already additional information in here. So there could be comma here, because maybe there's like additional information here, or like non-essential elements here, right? But there cannot be a comma before that. There will also be other punctuation around, but there can't be a comma specifically before that. And other than when the word that exists, this process that I'm about to share with you will tell you for sure if something's not an element or not. Okay. First thing, try removing it from the sentence. So whatever you think is not an essential element, try removing from the sentence. Okay. So let's say I wasn't sure, but I think this was non-essential element. So I'm just gonna delete it from the sentence, and then we read the sentence with it deleted and see if the sentence still makes sense. Okay, it just makes the perfect sense still. By the way, if you were to read this, so since the sentence still made perfect sense despite me removing that big chunk from the sentence, what I just removed is not essential to the sentence. Therefore, it's a non-essential element, and you should put commas around it then. Hopefully that makes sense. So, oh yeah, wherever it's touching the rest of the sentence, I need to put commas there because I just removed it and it made perfect sense. I would also make sure it's a two-step process really. So try removing from the sentence, but just to make sure that what you just removed was additional information. Make sure it was additional information. Okay. What additional information is despite struggling before they learned the strategy about? It's additional information about the word who. So we know it's additional information. Okay. And remember, we removed it from the sentence and the sentence still made perfect sense. So we hit the 2 check marks. Then we know for sure this is a non-social element. Obviously, there's not the word that in front of it too. Make sure you look out for that. To help you even more, here are some things that are always non-social elements. It's when you see this, you know for sure. So always non-essential element. Okay. So first thing is if it's starts with a dependent clause starter. So if something's other dependent clause starters, dependent clause starter, then we know it's a non-essential element. And by the way, I don't even go over dependent clauses. If it's a dependent clause starter and there's a subject and a main verb, it's a dependent clause. But I technically just went over, but I don't go over like the significance behind that, okay? I just treat dependent clauses as non-essential elements. That's how I look at it. I think this is the best way to look at it for the SAT. It's super simple. Just, yeah, it's a non-essential element. So basically, all sentences are made up of an independent clause with a bunch of non-essential elements attached to it. I mean, there could be no non-essential elements. It could just be independent clause by itself, or it could be independent clause with a bunch of additional information attached to it. But that's how you look at it. Okay, that's just all a sentence is made up of. There's no like complicatedness at all. Okay, and if it starts with a dependent clause starter, then by default, because it starts with a dependent clause starter, there was no way for it to be an independent clause, so it just has to be a non-essential element. Okay. And by the way, the SAT won't ever test you on dependent clauses being anywhere else other than the beginning of the sentence. So it makes it even easier. You just look at the beginning of the sentence. If it's a dependent clause starter and I'm trying to look for an independent clause, I just skip that right away and just go straight here. Because I know this has to be a non-essential element since it starts with a dependent clause starter, like although, when, while, the words like those. Okay. The other thing that is always a non-essential element is transition words. I define transition words as anything that describes the relationship between two sentences. And you notice I said between sentences, not to be confused with fanboys, for, and, nor, but, or, yet, so. These describe the relationships within sentences, not between two different sentences. Okay, transition words describe the relationship between sentences. These are big transition words like however or therefore. Okay, and I'll go way more in depth into this later in the video when I talk about transition placement questions. And you won't ever get tested on fanboys being placed differently on the SAT ever. At least like a physical college board doesn't do that. So you don't have to worry about like anything to do with fanboys, really. I just wanted to clear that up in case somebody asked in the comments though. So however though, if you see the word however, because it's a transition word, you need some kind of punctuation before and after it. Because like if it's gonna touch the rest of the sentence, it needs to be attached with a comma then, because it's a non-essential element. It's always that. And again, I'll go super in depth into this when I talk about transition placement questions later in the video. And next, let's talk about common non-essential elements. So this might help you speed things up. Because if you just see this, like you can already in your head, you can prime yourself like this is probably not essential element. I just need to check real quick, but it's not always though. It's just common. So be careful. You still need to check it. So this is which, and this is ing verbs. ing verbs. And this is really common for these to be non-essential elements. So the word which just sets up additional information, right? Like which and then additional information. It's really easy to set up. This is just a word that just gives away that what's coming up next is additional information. And just because the word which is like that, it tends to be starting non-essential elements all the time whenever you see the word which. So there's really common for a comma to be right before the word which. Same thing with ing verbs. It usually sets up additional information too. So usually there is a comma right before an ing verb, and obviously there would be comma give too then. Okay. And then don't get these confused with essential elements. Okay, that's the word that, which I already mentioned, but I'm gonna emphasize this again because they do test you on this. Okay, so if you see the word that, there is no comma before it because it's essential and not non-essential. And let's go over the final punctuation mark, which is dashes. Now, there technically is parentheses. I have seen a parentheses question, like a mythical parentheses question. If you do get it, it's super easy. I have seen it. I'm not going to put it in here because it's really easy. Obviously, a parentheses It does the same thing as a comma, by the way, but like what's in between has to be additional information and it's just somewhere in a sentence. And usually if you see a parentheses somewhere, for example, like, oh, there's a parentheses right there and there's a blank right there. And then you need to find an answer choice with the parentheses in it. Obviously you pick the one with the parentheses because you need to close off the open parentheses already in the sentence. It's super easy. I think everyone understands that. Okay, so I'm going to go over dashes, which is very similar to parentheses. But actually, there's two things on the SAT. Okay, first thing is attaching non-essential element, which is the exact same thing that an isolated comma does, at least the second thing an isolated comma does. Okay, the important thing about this, though, is it has to be in the middle of a sentence. So why is this important? Because the fact that it has to be only in the middle of a sentence, that means that there has to be an open and a closing dash. Like a dash has to be a dash sandwich. Yeah. That's important because it makes solving dashes much easier. Because if you see a dash in the answer choice and you see a dash in the passage, there's a good chance that the dash is the answer in the answer choice. Because the only way a dash is attached to non-essential elements is if there's an opening dash and a closing dash. So if you see an opening dash in the sentence already, there's a good chance that the answer has to be the one that has a dash in it because you need to close off the opening dash and vice versa. If you see a closing dash, it's probably an opening dash. Now, make sure, don't fall into the trap, okay? Make sure that there's actually additional information between the dashes. That's super important. I've seen lots of students get this wrong. It used to be, I think before August 2024, you could just pick the dash answers every single time whenever you saw a dash, but they fixed it. Now you actually have to read in between the dashes to make sure it's actually additional information in between dashes. I think it's always going to be really obvious that's additional information. It's really easy to tell. Just make sure that there's additional information in between dashes. Super important. But you can take advantage of the fact that like, there has to be opening and closing dash. It has to be a dash sandwich. And that helps you speed things up as well. The second thing in dash does, same thing as a colon. So everything a colon can do, a dash can do too. So there has to be independent clause before and an expanded dot after the dash. Okay, that doesn't mean vice versa. Okay, because a colon can't do the first thing a dash does. Only a dash replaces a colon. You can't replace a colon with a dash. And that's all the 6 punctuation marks. Let's move on to what I like to call the priority list. And this is the order you check the answer choices in. Okay, I don't check the answer choices as A, B, C, D in that order, like most people do. I check it based on which answer choice is most likely to be correct. Okay, the first thing is a colon. So if I see a colon, let's say answer choice C, I'm checking that answer choice first to see if that's correct first. I don't check A first. Okay, I check the colon first because that is way more likely to be correct than answer choice A. Okay, next thing is just the lots of things, period, semicolon, because they kind of do the same thing, period, semicolon, comma, FANBOYS. Okay? That's the second level. So if a colon isn't there, then you would check a period first, or you would check a comma FANBOYS first, if you see a comma FANBOYS, right? And if you see all these together, you could just pick whichever one to check first. Doesn't matter. Okay? Third is isolated comma. And fourth is no punctuation. So I purposely called everything the way that they are because it forms the acronym CPIN. This might help you memorize it. It might not, but this is a way to memorize the order. Just keep in mind, this P is just for the period. There's also the semicolon and comma FANBOYS in that line as well. Okay. And again, this is the order you check the answer choices in. And there's actually a big difference, by the way. I want you to understand how powerful this is, okay? I was only able to come up with this by looking at hundreds and hundreds of grammar questions made by College Board, and I calculated what is the likelihood for each answer to be correct. And not only that, I also calculated like how it compares to other answers. Like when a colon shows up, how likely it is for a period. And when there was not a colon, how likely is it for a period to be correct? And that's how I was able to come up with this. And this is powerful. It's super powerful stuff. For example, I bet most of you watching this video, if you just picked a colon every single time you saw it, your grammar score would be way higher than it is currently. Just letting you know, because there's almost a 90% chance for a colon to be correct. And by the way, in the second module, this works even better in the second module. So to me, actually, grammar in this hard second module is easier than grammar in the first module, which is insane. But it's because I just know the patterns really well. And the patterns tend to work better for this hard second module. It's pretty much 100% chance. Whenever you see a colon, that's correct in the second module. It's insane. Okay? I'll show you example. Looking at this question, again, here is the priority list again. I want you to tell me which answer choice are you checking first in this question. Okay, here's the priority list. Here's the answer choices. Which answer choice are you checking first? You should have said D, okay, because D is the first thing in the priority list. It's way more likely to be correct. There's genuinely like a 95% chance this is correct. I'm guessing this is the second module question, honestly. There's probably like a 95% chance it's correct. If you just pick the code every single time, your score will probably increase by a lot. Because not only will you save tons of time, you'll also get it correct every single time. Because it's way more likely to be correct than any of the other answer choices. It's like by a huge margin. It's crazy. Okay. But on the actual test, I would say, okay, D is probably correct. I'm just going to make sure. How do you know D is correct? If there's an independent clause before and some kind of expanded thought of what was before right after the colon. So that's what you do, okay? I see D. I'm going to look at the passage and check. I already know what I'm looking for. Checking for an independent clause, specifically subject and a main verb in the part before the colon. And after the colon, I need to check for it expanding on what was said before the colon. Okay, so I'm going to do this. And so I know that's the information right away. So I can skip that. Easterns, that's a subject. University, psychologist. Oh, so this is like a person. That's a subject. Found, that's a verb. That's an independent clause immediately. I'm just going to make sure I want to understand like why it's commas here, which I'll go over in the process, but this is just to give you an idea of how fast you can do it. So normally I would go like, oh yeah, subject, main verbs. There's probably independent clauses. Make sure sounds like additional information, comma. Okay, ends right there. Yeah, so additional information. There was, yeah, that's for sure. And just high on, yeah. So that's definitely an independent clause. Openness experience. That sounds like it expands on the one personality trait that it's particularly high on. So that's an example. So it's definitely expanding on what I said before, right? So the independent clause before, expanded thought after, it's D. I do not need to check any of the other answer choices. I know 100% certainty it's D because there's an independent clause before and the expanded thought on the independent clause after it. I also understand the structure of the sentence, which I'll talk about later. But I know for sure it's D. Like I guarantee it's D. And move on to the next question. And that's like a 10-second question. Well, normally, if you go through all the answer choices, by the time you get the answer choice D, like a minute would have passed by already. Versus somebody who knows, okay, D is way more likely to be correct. I just need to make sure it's correct. Yep, move on. It's 10 seconds. It's a huge, huge difference, like light and day. Now, you might have noticed that this priority list doesn't include all the punctuation marks I went over earlier, and that's because of something called shortcuts. Now, I call these shortcuts because they're shortcuts. You address these first before you go to the priority list, if you see these. The first one is title name, which I go over in a bit. Dashes, which you already know what to do. Hopefully, there's non-essential information in between the dashes, really, and then it could also replace a colon if that exists. And then question marks. I'll go over in a bit too. And again, if you see one of these, you address that first before you go to the priority list. Let's go over title name first. Now, title name questions actually makes up about 15% of all punctuation questions, which is insane because of how easy they are. They're probably the fastest type of questions that you can solve in all of the SAT, honestly. It's ridiculously fast. And there's so many of them. There's like 2 every test, pretty much. Or 3 even. I even seen one test have like 4 title name questions. It's back to back to back. It was insane. Okay, so this is what title name question is. What I mean by title name is if there's a title and a name, okay, the title has to be before the name. And what I mean by title is you can think of it as the category the name falls under. So if I say astronaut Buzz Aldrin, astronaut is the title of the name Buzz Aldrin. So the rule of title name is that if there's a title and there's a name right after the title, and these are both in the same phrase, then there can never be any punctuation between the title and name. Okay, hopefully this is an ironclad rule. So you have to make sure it's in the same phrase though. So how to circumvent this is actually just read a few words before the title just to make sure like it makes sense for these to be in the same phrase. For example, like critics have noted the way pioneer and playwright Wakako Yamauchi. Right, that makes sense within the same phrase. Okay. Versus, let's go to this question. There's actually a new question. They recently added this as well. Okay. Try reading this question. See if the title and the name is in the same phrase for this question. Okay, hopefully you paused the video and looked at this. Sweet potato plant is obviously the title, and TN57 is the name here. However, if you just read the 4 words ahead, 2 varieties of the sweet potato plant, and then TN57. That doesn't make sense at all because these aren't in the same phrase. It's the 2 varieties of the sweet potato plant And then it talks about this plant, which is this, and then this plant. So these are the two plants, actually. In actuality, the answer should be D here, because these are in the same phrase. This is actually an independent clause, and then this is an expansion of what was said before. So these aren't in the same phrase. Okay, it should be extremely obvious to you that these aren't in the same phrase. Like, this is extremely obvious. Like, two varieties of the sweet potato plant, and it's talking about one thing. Like, obviously, it doesn't make sense for this to happen. So this is the only exception, by the way, I've seen where like there is a title right next to a name, like it's in fact right before the name, but there was punctuation in between. This is the only exception I've seen, and it's just how to talk about this is just read a few words ahead just to make sure it makes sense for these to be on the same phrase. Okay, it's like sweet potato this. It makes sense like this is actually the title of the name. Okay, make sure that's actually what's happening here. In this case, it's not. The sweet potato plant is actually part of the thing before the colon, and this is actually what's coming after the colon. And again, just read a few words ahead of it. Maybe 5 words, or 3 to 5 words, basically. Honestly, 3 words would be fine, I think. Okay. Let's do this question, go back to this question. So when you know that there's no punctuation between title and name, that does not mean that there can't be a comma here. Okay, there could still be a comma here. Okay, I only said there couldn't be any punctuation between the title and the name. That does not exclude you from this comma. This comma might be here because of another reason. Let's say attaching a non-essential element somewhere. And again, the only reason why a comma would be there in the first place is attaching non-essential elements because there's no comma list here, obviously. So then what I would do is just read around it and just see if there is any additional information around this comma, like before or after it. And if there is, then that comma should be there. Right, so critics have noted the pioneering, but there isn't. Like, this is pioneering playwright compares. This is like a regular independent clause, subject and main verb. There's no additional information here. So there's no comma. The answer is D here for this question. But just be careful. There's actually a 40% chance that there could be a comma here when you're stuck between C and D. There is a 40%. There's a 60% chance it's this one, but it's also like almost like equally likelihood chance that there could be a comma here. So you actually have to read the passage. But there are a lot of questions where you can just get the answer right away. For example, let's go to. And this question, now this is a good example of when title and name can be tricky to recognize, at least. So pause the video, see if you can solve this. Okay, you should have seen song, and then the name of a song. And this makes perfect sense. Like, you would have heard the hit song, A Tear. So it makes sense that the song is actually the title of the song, right? A Tear. And since all of these are punctuation, I'm sorry if it's blurry, but it's pretty obvious. There's punctuation here, right? This is a title and name. There shouldn't be any punctuation between title and name. The answer is D. And this is the only option. The only option with no punctuation is D, so you just pick D and move on. And this is like literally a 2-second question at this point. Okay. Now, there could be multiple names after the title, if it makes sense, right? Like this title is plural, and then there's 2 names after it because it's the title of the 2 names. But that makes sense. Like languages, and these are 2 languages. So that could make sense too. Okay, try solving this. Okay, I think it's pretty obvious. It's C because including is in the same phrase, including the languages, this language and this language makes perfect sense. And title name, no punctuation between. All of these are punctuation except for C. C is the answer. Now, it might be hard to recognize this. So what I suggest you to do, at least at first, I think to me, it's gotten to a point where I can recognize title and name just any time without even thinking. It's just like in my brain. I can just recognize it when I see it. However, it's going to be hard for you at first to recognize title and name. I think it's pretty easy to recognize it when there's a profession and a name. A profession and name is really easy to recognize because it's pretty easily recognizable. It's unique to this type of title name question where you see profession and name like this. However, when you see something else like a song and then the name of a song, this is way harder to recognize if it's title name. Like, you probably solve this like normally. You check the colon first, see if there's anything else before, and you go through all that. And maybe 40 seconds later, you're like, wait, why can't I get the answer? Oh, it's because it's a title name question. It's wasted tons of time. So to avoid that scenario where you can't recognize the title name question, what I recommend is when you first go into a grammar section of the module, just go through all the grammar questions. There's usually 6 grammar questions per module. Just go through the grammar questions real quick, like press next, and just look for all the title names. Because when you're actively looking for title name, it's much easier to recognize title name. It's just when you're not actively looking for it, if it's a title name question, it's hard to recognize it. So what I do is like, when you load up the module and you first do grammar, just go through the questions and just look for title name. Right? It's like, look to see if there could be a title name. Obviously, these aren't title name yet, right? Oh yeah, bam, title name. I think this one's also easy to recognize because there's a profession and a name. But what's the answer to this one? Let's look at the answer first. It's C. And you can just do that. So just like spend like 3 seconds per each of the title name questions, get those out of the way. And after you find out the title name questions, then you can go back and do the rest of the questions. There's probably more. Let me split to the pod. I think there's one more here. right? So you just like go through the questions. Oh yeah, bam. Okay, so when you're actively looking for it, it's much easier to recognize. Like this could be a title, and Chile seems to be a nation, so I need to make sure. Yeah, in fellow OECD nations, Luxembourg, or sorry, nations, Chile and Luxembourg. Yeah, that makes sense, right? Title name nations, and then obviously nations is definitely the title of Chile and Luxembourg in this context. So it's definitely D because there can't be any punctuation between nations and then the name of the nation. Okay, and that's pretty much it for title name questions. Those are pretty easy to do. Now let's move on. We already know what a dash does. Again, if I see a dash, I just look in the passage to see if there's already a dash. If there already is a dash, I make sure there's no information between the dashes. Maybe they will test you on the fact that it could replace a colon, so check for that too. Just make sure. Like if I put it in dash still, can a colon go there? Is there an independent clause before and expanded dot after? You might assume that question mark questions have question marks in the answer choices, and you would be completely correct. Yeah. So if you see question marks, it's a question mark question. These are always ranked easy by College Board, by the way. And easy questions you can pretty much always solve by just reading and seeing what sounds best and picking that. Which I'm pretty sure you get 100% accuracy just doing that. But if you want to systemize this, what I would do is look at the beginning of the question, which is just beginning of the sentence. So just look at the beginning of the sentence and see if that's how you would normally start a question. Like, is this who, what, where, when, why, how? If it starts with one of those words, or if, do, like, you get the idea. If it starts with how you normally start a question, then you put a question mark at the end. If not, then you don't. Is psychophysicist how you normally start a question? I don't think so. So it's not A or C for sure. Okay, and then from here on, honestly, just read it and just pick the one that sounds the best. Like that's really the best way to solve these. Honestly, if you want to get really specific, again, like you can kind of ignore this if this makes no sense to you. Just make sure that how you normally start a question, like do is how you normally start a question, right? Or like anything to do with like the question, like asking a question, put that at the beginning. It should be at the beginning of the sentence, not at the middle of the sentence, like this. So you shouldn't have the do here. The do should be at the beginning here. So obviously B is wrong. So the answer is D. Hopefully that makes sense. Because yeah, I mean do should be at the beginning. If it was at the beginning, then the answer would probably be C then actually, because that's how you normally start a question with do. Okay. But really, I would just look at the beginning of the question, see if that's how you normally start a question. If not, then you just pick the one that's not a question. If it is, then you pick the one that is a question and just pick the one that sounds best from there. Okay. The one exception to the beginning of the sentence thing is if there's a colon. There's a one to show you. This is the only question I'm saying like this, but I just want to bring it up in case somebody like types in the comments about this question. So how? So if you see a colon, then it's gonna start at right after the colon. That's where the question starts. So you see it starts with how, and then we know then that there should be a question mark there because the question starts with how you normally start a question, and we have to pick between C and D. This one's complicated, right? But try solving this. See which one sounds better. You should have picked D. If you want to really systemize this, will is part of the question. Like how will, that's part of the question. So the will should be at the beginning. But that doesn't make sense. Just honestly, it's always going to be easy. I swear, I've never seen question mark questions not be ranked easy by College Board. So they're always really easy. So look at the beginning of the question and just pick accordingly. We are almost done with all this. Just one more thing, and that's transition placement questions. These are probably the hardest grammar question in all of the SAT. But grammar questions are easy in general, so this is actually still pretty easy. Just make sure you understand this. This makes up about 12% of all punctuation questions, so they are really common, just akin to title name questions. So you should definitely know this, and they basically only appear in the second module, actually. The whole second module. Okay, transition placement questions, this is what I'm talking about. When you see, it's a grammar question, but you see transition words, and then you see punctuation around transition words. Now, you notice I put this below shortcuts and party lists at the very end, because you should still follow the steps for this before you try dealing with the transition word. So for example, if we were to look at, for example, this transition word, what answer choices should you check to see if they're correct first? Okay. You should be checking A or B because there's a semicolon on the party list. There's actually an 89% chance the answer is either A or B. There's only a 11% chance the answer is C. There's a 0% chance it's D because again, transition words are always non-essential elements, so there has to be some kind of punctuation before and after it. Especially at least there has to be a comma somewhere, right? Because like if you're trying to attach it, if it's touching the rest of the sentence, which is how it's clearly doing, it's touching the rest of the sentence, there needs to be a commas to attach it. and there isn't. So we know it's not D. So if you need a transition word, there has to be punctuation before and after it. Okay, so we'll just put in A, B, and C. Now, there is an 11% chance that there is no independent clause before and after. And by the way, like if you see it's semicolon, first you should check for semicolon list. There's no semicolon list here, obviously. So then, okay, the only reason why semicolon is correct there is if it's attaching independent clause before and after. If there was an independent clause before or after, there was not, then we can just pick C immediately and move on. And this saves a lot of time because 11% of the time you can just pick C and move on. Like the one that doesn't have any semicolons, or sometimes there's colons in here, sometimes there's periods in here. You never know, but just like follow the party list first. Just ignore the transition word. Transition words, okay, don't get confused about like a transition word being here. It's just not such information. Just ignore it, okay? I'll go more in depth into this when we're reading the process and these like that, but you're just looking for an independent clause. Okay, this has no effect. This is just like if there's additional information in the independent clause, it doesn't matter. Okay, just find the independent clause. Yep, there's an independent clause in the sentence the break is in before the semicolon. There's an independent clause there before the semicolon. And there's an independent clause after. If you read this, all historic designations must be approved. Yep, that's a verb. And all historic designations is subject. So there's an independent clause. There was an independent clause before and after. And then you have to check between A or B. Now, you have to be careful. I just want to warn you about the word though. And they are really tricky with this. Actually, let's just go down to this question. I made this question just for this. Okay, this is tricky. You can't just eliminate C and D here. You can't. Because though might not be a transition word. Sometimes the transition word, sometimes it's not. Same thing with the word although. If you see although, that same thing. But those are the only two, by the way. Only two that are mixed between transition words and not transition words. Because though can also be a dependent clause starter. Right? Like if it's a dependent clause starter, it might just like though I did this. Right? That's just like a normal use of the word though. It's a dependent clause starter. So the though might actually be acting as a dependent clause starter and not as a transition word. Any other transition word thing though, like however, thus, therefore, anything that's not though or although, those are guaranteed to be transition words. But if you see the word though or the alternate version although, which mean the same thing, by the way. I don't even know why there's two different words to mean the same thing. But though and although, if you see those, just keep in mind that they might not be transition words for each one. So what I would do, let's actually try solving this one. I don't remember this question. I made this a long time ago. So as you pause the video, see if you can solve this. Okay. And I'm going to solve this. So first of all, we check the semicolon first. Okay. And if you didn't check the semicolon first, you need to reevaluate your life. No, you need to reevaluate the way that you're looking at the process of punctuation. Okay. Your process should be exactly my process. I can't stress that enough. And we'll go way more in depth into this right after this as well. Okay. So semicolon, there's no semicolon list here, obviously. So the only reason why semicolon is correct is if it's linking independent clauses. There's independent clause before and independent clause after. Such interpretations, that's a subject, by the way. Like even, yeah, this such interpretation, that's a thing. Such interpretations, what they do, they are ultimately special. So that's a verb. That's an independent clause. Independent clause before it. The object's gray coloration may be, that's a verb too. So that's also an independent clause. There was an independent clause before and independent clause after the semicolon. So we pick A, and we know C is wrong actually. Because though there's no comma here, because there's no comma here, we know it's not a transition word. Because if it was a transition word, there has to be a comma there because it's not such an element, right? Since there's no comma there, this has to be a dependent clause starter then. Yeah, and since this is an independent clause, actually, if you would have read this, you would realize it's an independent clause. And if I put a though in front of the independent clause, that's not an independent clause anymore. So then this would be incorrect. The semicolon would be incorrect here now, because what's after it wouldn't be an independent clause anymore, because this is a dependent clause starter, and dependent clause starter turns this entire thing into a non-structured element, and there's no subject and main verb anymore, other than these two. So there's no. Hopefully this makes sense, right? This is just a dependent clause now. It's non-structured element because of the word though. So there's no independent clause after the semicolon, so C is wrong. And then the only thing that is left is A. And you could just pick A and move on, because there is an independent clause before the semicolon and after the semicolon. And this though is a transition word because it's a comma there. So we can just kind of ignore it when we're reading this. Just like any other additional information thing, or I'll teach you that in the process too. Okay. Hope it makes sense. Independent clause before and after, so the answer is A. And there's no that for C, because this is a dependent clause. So just watch out for though and although. They do trick you with that. Actually, I actually prefer this. As long as you understand, it's actually even easier, because you don't actually have to pick between A and C now. Now let's talk about what you actually have to do when you pick between A and B. because, or like when you see like the placement of the transition word, right? It's why I call it transition placement question, because they're testing you on which side should the transition word be on. Now, this is gonna sound confusing at first, but I swear this is the easiest way I can possibly explain this to you for it to carry on for every single type of these types of questions. So I just want you to pay attention, and if it doesn't make sense the first time, rewind what I'm about to say and just rewatch it until it makes sense. I promise you, it makes sense. It's like understand the words that are coming out of my mouth when I'm saying this. I can't stress this enough because there's so many students who don't understand this, and then they come to me and I just literally repeat the exact same thing I said in the video, and then they're able to understand it. It doesn't make any sense to me. So just understand this, okay? Pay close attention. Actually, I'm gonna write this down so you don't have to like actually listen. Okay, here. Okay. Transition word describes the relationship between two sentences next. My head's getting right. Next to each other, and it's not a good use for the word "and," obviously, but okay. And it's always the sentence the transition word is a part of, and the sentence before that. Okay, this is how you figure out which way to put the transition. Should it be before the semicolon or should it be after the semicolon? Again, it might not be a semicolon, it might be a period, maybe a colon, but it's how you figure it out. Let's read the first sentence again. A transition word describes the relationship between two sentences next to each other. Okay, first of all, what relationship is the transition word describing? The transition word is however, obviously. However, is contrasting. So it's describing a contrasting relationship. Now, most of the time it will be contrasting. However, it's not always going to be contrasting, just to let you know. Sometimes some questions have a therefore in it, and then it'll be cause and effect instead of contrasting. So whatever the transition word is, that's the relationship it's describing. Obviously, it's a transition word that's describing the relationship. All right, okay. Between two sentences next to each other. What does this mean? Okay, there are three sentences in this passage, by the way. I'm going to treat the semicolon as a period, like you should for all transition placement questions. There are three sentences. So the first sentence is sociologists all the way to road bridge. That's the first sentence. Second sentence, Okinaka doesn't make such decisions single-handedly. That's another sentence, right? Because we treat the semicolon as a period. Third sentence, all historical designations must be approved by a group of 900 experts, and so on and so forth. Three sentences. Now, if however describes the relationship between two sentences next to each other, that means we can't have a contrast between the first and the third. Okay, it will only be the sentences next to each other. So it can only be the first and the second one, so the second and first one, or the third and the second one, or the second, third one, whatever way you think of it. These are the only possible two. Okay, so basically what we're going to have to do is we're going to read the passage and figure out which two sentences are contrasting. Is it the first two or is it the last two? And then we pick the according answer choice. Now, how do you figure out which answer choice is correct? Let's say the first two were contrasting. These two are contrasting. The answer is going to be A because of this second part. And it's always the sentence the transition word is a part of and the sentence before that. Let's look at which sentence this transition word is a part of. However, this transition word is a part of this sentence, right? Because the sentence ends there, semicolons over there. So this is a part of this middle sentence. It's always the sentence it is a part of and the sentence before that. So it's a part of this sentence. So it's this sentence and the sentence before that one. Hopefully that's making sense. Okay? It's the sentence it's a part of and the sentence before that one. So that means A is saying these two sentences are contrasting. So if you were to read the passage and figure out these two sentences are contrasting, then you would pick A, because A is saying these two sentences are contrasting, which is correct. Okay. However, if you were to read the last two sentences and figure out these are contrasting, but the first two isn't, so you know, okay, it's only these two that are contrasting, you need to pick the answer choice that corresponds, which is B. Because B, this, however, is a part of this sentence, right? Because the sentence ends there. However, is a part of this sentence then, because the sentence ends right there. It's a part of this sentence. It's always the sentence it's a part of and a sentence before that one. So it's a part of this sentence. It's a part of that sentence. The sentence before that one. I can't say this enough, and I'm going to keep on repeating this until you pick this up because I swear I can't find a way to expand this easier. I can talk about like sides, like, oh, it's on the left side, but I want to apply to all transition word questions then. So I think this is the best way to explain it, and to the point where it's going to work for every single transition placement question you'll see. Okay. Okay, B is a part, it's this end, is a part of this end, it's the sentence before that one. So B is saying the last two are contrasting. Because it's however it's a contrasting relationship, and it's the sentence that it's a part of the sentence before that one. So it's these two sentences. So B is saying these two sentences are contrasting. So if you were to read the passage and figure out, oh, these two sentences are contrasting, then you would pick B. And if what I said doesn't make sense, if I lost you somewhere, I want you to rewind the video to when I started typing this out, and it's fun replaying the video until you understand worst case scenario. Okay, hopefully that made sense. So try solving this question. Okay, we already identified that it's either A or B because there's independent clause before and after the semicolon. But try reading this question and figure out which two sentences are contrasting, and then pick the according answer choice. Hopefully, you read it and you realize these two are contrasting, and that if you don't agree, here's why. Okay? Sociologist Alton Okinaka sits on the review board tasked with adding new sites, and which includes, this is additional information basically. And you notice there's a comma here and there's a which, because this is not such an element. Okay. Anyways, that's off topic. So basically, this sentence is saying this person sits on the review board tasked with adding new sites. And the second sentence is saying this person, Okinaka, same person, doesn't make such decisions single-handedly. So basically, it's saying this person, their job is adding this stuff, and then the sentence saying they can't do their job. That is definitely contrasting. Okay, these two sentences are contrasting with each other. And you can confirm this further by reading the third sentence and seeing if these two sentences have even a chance of contrasting each other. Because if these two don't contrast and these two are contrasting, then you know for sure you've read everything correctly. Okay. All historical designations must be approved by a group of 9 other experts. You can tell this is actually supporting this. This is saying why Okinaka can't make such decisions single-handedly. It's supporting it, actually. So it's definitely not contrasting. So make sure you understand. This is the only type of grammar question where you actually have to understand the sentence deeply, or to understand the passage deeply. Okay. So since these two sentences are contrasting, the answer is A, because A is saying the first two sentences are contrasting, because it's always the sentence the transition word is a part of, and sentence before that one. That it's telling the relationship of, like, whatever the relationship the transition word is saying. And however it is saying contrasting, so it's saying these two sentences are contrasting. Okay, now here is a cool tip. There is about a 90% chance that A is correct when you're picking between A and B, by the way. So it's really high likelihood for it to be A. I'm going to repeat that. There's like a 90% chance that the however is going to be before the semicolon, or the transition word is going to be before the semicolon. So if you see this, or I guess it would be a colon or period in other scenarios. So whenever you see like a colon, period, semicolon, whatever, there's a 90% chance that the transition word is going to be before it. It's not always though, but before it. So you can check this one first. So read these two sentences first, and if it is contrasting, that saves you a lot of time, because, oh yeah, this is for sure contrasting, you can just pick that and move on, because that's like 90% of the time. There's only a time, like when you got it down between A and B here, or got it down between which side the transition word should be, there's a really good chance that it's the transition word goes before the punctuation mark. So you just check that one first before you check the other one. That is transition placement grammar questions. By the way, don't get those confused with actual transition questions where there's like different transition words in each answer choice. Those are completely different. This is the placement of the transition word, which side does the transition word go on. Okay. Notice this is all there is to punctuation. I didn't mention exclamation points. I didn't mention quotation marks. I did not do that because the SAT do not test you on this. So that means the exclamation, I've never seen the exclamation point be the correct answer ever. Okay, ever. There was never the correct answer. Also, quotation marks, they don't test you on quotation marks. So if you see quotation marks, just pretend they're not there. Okay, I've seen so many students get questions wrong because they think, oh, I need to put a comma before quotation mark to introduce the quotation mark. That is wrong because the SAT doesn't test you on it. The only reason why a comma is correct is if it's attaching non-essential elements. And if it's not doing that, then there shouldn't be a comma there. And obviously there could be a comma list, but those are really rare. You get the idea. Okay, so follow this, what I taught you, strictly. Don't do anything else. Every single question you answer has to be based on something I just taught you. Okay, if you're using your own thing, if you're doing what sounds right or things like that, you won't be able to improve like that because you're kind of just relying on your gut instinct. It's really hard to build off your gut instinct. I mean, your gut instinct can get better, but if you have an exact process you're doing, it's so much easier to improve because you feel like, okay, I just need to fix this part of my process, and then you improve. Versus gut instinct, oh, let me just get better at my intuition. That's so much harder. It's like a skill you need to build, and that's really hard to do. But you can get fast at grammar super fast if you just learn all the rules and just follow my process, which is the fastest way you can possibly solve any grammar question. Speaking of the process, let's tell you what the process is. Here is the punctuation process. And the first thing in this process is look at the answer choices first. This actually goes for all of grammar questions, not just punctuation questions, because the answer choices tell you what to do next. And it's only applies to grammar questions, by the way. Don't do this for reading comprehension or math questions. You should read passages first for those. But for grammar questions specifically, you look at the answer choices first always, because the answer choices tell you what to do next. For example, if you would have read the passage first for, let's say, like this question, it would take forever because you would read it and then you don't even have like something you're looking for. Really. You're just reading it and you're understanding it. Oh yeah, that makes sense. And then you go to the answer choice. Oh yeah, and then you check which answer choice matches. It's just so much back and forth. You can cut your time in half just by starting with the answer choices first. You go this. Oh, I should check A first because of the priority list, right? You check A first to see if there's an independent clause before and after. You already have what you're looking for in your head. I know there has to be an independent clause before and independent clause after. Specifically, I'm looking for subject and the main verb. And there's pretty much a 90% chance it is A. If it's the second module, it's basically a 100% chance it's A. And you can just verify it's A and move on. It's so much faster. It literally cuts the time in half. And even more when you take advantage of the priority list because you know which answer to check first. Okay, so you look at the answer choices first, always. Just jumps immediately to the answer choices. It should be instinct for you. Every single time you go into a grammar question, you just deviate to the answer choices. Like your eyes just go there every single time. Okay, when you look at the answer choices, you plan out all your steps just from the answer choices. So while I'm looking at these answer choices, I already have all the steps in mind. I already know, okay, I'm going to check A first and check for independent clause before and after. It's definitely pretty much always going to be A. If not A, then the next thing would be isolated comma in the priority list. Now I'm going to check C or D and check why would C or D be correct if there was unnecessary additional information or like non-essential elements somewhere before or after the comma, and the comma is attaching that. So I need to look for that, right? And if there's none of that, then it's going to be B. And that's my process. And I already have that in my head, just instinctively, honestly. But like at first, you should plan it out in your head before you do it. Eventually, you get to a point where you just look at the answer choices and just immediately are able to do that. It's just second nature, and you'll be able to solve grammar questions so fast. You will be a superpower. Like if somebody were to look at your screen while you do grammar questions, they would be mind blown at how fast you can solve them. Which you'll see in a second of how fast I can solve these. Okay. And specifically, when you plan on in your mind, you notice I had what I was looking for in my head. Right? When I was, okay, I need to look for A and see if there's an independent clause, specifically a subject and the main verb before. Like you already have what you're looking for in your head. But that way, when you're reading, you're not just reading aimlessly. That's passive reading. If you're just reading it, you look at answers, like you have an idea, and you just like go mind blank and go reading this, it's not helpful. Instead, if you have exactly what you're going to look for while you're reading it, that's active reading, so much more powerful. Because you know exactly what you're looking for. You can just find it and then move on. It's so much faster that way. So have exactly what you're looking for in the passage in mind before you even look in the passage. And when you go into the passage, you should always be looking for a subject and the main verb. The only exception may be a shortcut. For example, if you see a title and name, you can just get the answer right away. If you see a question mark question, like it's pretty much its own type of question at that point. So the only exception may be shortcuts. Every other scenario, though, you should be looking for a subject and a main verb. And the technique is what I like to call comma jumping. Now, this is super powerful because you don't have to understand the sentence at all. You just need to jump from comma to comma, okay? I'm going to solve this question real quick and just show you, okay? So again, we talked about going to the answer choices. We see a period, so we know there has to be an independent clause before and after. Specifically, we're looking for subject and main verb, okay? Let me scroll so you can see the entire thing. So the pedagogy of this, so right now is a subject. Right now, in my head, I'm only looking for a subject. A subject is a thing. By the way, pronouns could be subjects too. I just want to make this clear because like it could be a subject. This is actually like an independent clause. She's fun, right? She is fun. This is a contraction for she is. If you don't know that, then you should definitely watch the video where I go for pronouns. The last part of this playlist, the last video of this playlist. Okay, but the word many is actually a pronoun too. Like many did this. This is actually a sentence. It's an independent clause. Many is a pronoun actually. This is because like many people, for example. But as long as it's like a thing, you should be able to tell. It's like a thing that did something. I think it's pretty easy. Many did is obviously the main verb. So that's an independent clause. There's a subject and a main verb. So in my head, I'm looking for like a thing that could be a subject right away. So pedagogy, that could be a subject. of the Suzuki method is as a main verb. So I know it's an independent clause immediately. Okay, so independent clause before, not immediately after. So developed by, so right now I immediately know that that's additional information. I already figured that out at this point. If you can't, then maybe you have to read the entire thing, but you should get to a level, if you do this a lot, you should get really comfortable at, like, especially noticing the patterns of, yeah, this is definitely additional information. This is talking about like who something was developed by something, right? So it's additional information about something. Who saw, that's also additional information, because who start to parallel, like this is additional information about the person. I can just recognize that right away. Okay, so you notice I don't even read the entire thing. I just say, oh, additional information, jump to the next comma. This is what I mean by comma jumping. You just jumping to the next comma, because commas are what separates additional information. So if you just jump to the next comma, you go to the next part of the sentence, because you already know that's additional information, like a non-subject element, so you don't have to check that anymore. Okay. So we know that's a non-subject element. So we jump to this comma. The method emphasizes. So right now that's a subject and the main verb. Bam. Okay. Independent clause before and after. The answer is A. And now I slowed down because I was explaining stuff, right? But in real time, this will literally be like, oh, A, check A first. Subject, main verb, check. No. Subject, main verb, check. A. Move on. And the answer is A. Like, it's ridiculously fast if you get good at this. And I don't think it's that hard, honestly. You just like do 100 grammar questions, you'll get to that level pretty easily. And this is 100% accuracy too. Super fast. It's ridiculous. Like, you'll build a superpower. And then the final thing is make sure you 100% understand the structure of the sentence before you select the answer. What I mean by structure is you have to understand why all the punctuation marks are there. So whichever sentence the blank is in, you understand why all the commas are there, why the semicolons are there, why if there's a dash, like why all the dashes are there, and exactly that. Okay, you don't actually have to understand the sentence, but you just have to understand it enough to understand the structure of the sentence, like all the commas and things like that. For example, for this question, I understood, okay, that comma is there because it's attaching this non-essential element to this sentence, and then it's attaching this non-essential element to this sentence. That's why that comma is there. And there wasn't any other commas here, so that's why I stopped at emphasizes, because I was like, oh yeah, there's no commas, no more punctuation marks. So I understood why each punctuation mark is where they were in the sentence. And this is super helpful because it prevents mistakes. A lot of times, let's say you forgot to find a semicolon list question because you saw a semicolon, you immediately thought independent clauses, but you forgot to look for semicolon lists. That does happen, and it shouldn't happen because it should be ingrained like in your process. When you see a semicolon, you always look for semicolon list. But in case that did happen, you would know if you stopped here and there's a semicolon list here, you stopped here and you wouldn't have realized. But then you read on, you go, oh, there's a semicolon right there. So it's a semicolon list question. And for this question, let's say there was a comma here. Then I would have read this part because I already knew this was an independent clause because of method and emphasizes. I already knew it was an independent clause. However, I didn't know for sure if this was non-subject element or not. I would verify to see what additional information this is about. Like, why is this comma here? Maybe I misread it. Maybe it turns out that when I read this part again, this is actually an independent clause. Like, a comma's here, and this is an independent clause. Then I would be wrong because there's an independent clause here and an independent clause here. And you can't link two independent clauses with a comma. This has to be a period, semicolon, or a comma FANBOYS, obviously. So I knew I would have been wrong. Obviously, it's not the case here, but just for an example. And there are lots of crazy questions of like commas all over the place, and people just tend to just pick what sounds best, and they don't actually fully understand everything. And it turns out if they just only looked at where all the commas were and understood why each comma was where it was, then they would have gotten the question right. But they just didn't do that. And they just, as soon as they got there, they thought they knew the answer and they picked that. So you need to understand why other commas are there. Again, you don't have to understand the sentence at all, but you have to understand why each punctuation mark is where it is. After a grammar question, if you were to ask me what the sentence was about, I could not tell you anything. But I could tell you that there was two commas before this period, and there's a dash after this period that with a closing dash there. I could tell you all that stuff because pay attention to that stuff only. So that is how I solve punctuation questions. And now let's do a quick recap of everything we went over so far in this video, because it's really important that you understand this before we go into the example questions. First of all, we learned how to find independent clauses. We had to look for three things. I guess it's two things and one thing that there can't be, really. But you have to know how to find these fast. Then we talked about the 6 punctuation marks on the SAT, specifically what to look for in the passage to know if that punctuation mark is correct or not. Then we talked about the priority list and the shortcuts. The priority list is the order you check the answer choices in, organized by how likely it is for each answer choice to be correct. So it saves a lot of time if you follow this. Then we talked about shortcuts, which is kind of its own type of question. We talked about how to solve title name questions. We talked about how to solve question mark questions. And we talked about how to solve transition placement questions as well. And finally, we talked about how I solve punctuation questions as a whole, at least the process for everything, and how to solve these really fast. Now, this is super important that you memorize this. And here it is again. You could screenshot this page, I guess. I would memorize this for the next section, which is going to be the most important section of this video, where I'm going to go over example questions. And I'm going to have you solve the example question first before I solve them. It's going to help you a lot because you get to practice your process. There's a difference between knowing how to do something and actually be able to do it. And humans learn best from demonstration. So if you get to see me actually put everything into process and practice questions, it's going to clear lots of things up. Because I bet right now you have some misconceptions on how this actually works and comes together and everything like that. Okay, and it's really important. Hopefully you screenshot this by now, and I would pause this video, actually memorize this. This is going to give you the most out of the next section of this video. So pause the video, spend some time memorizing this. I don't think it's that hard, honestly, because independent clauses, I think we're going to know how to do that, and like most people know the majority of this stuff, and it makes sense, hopefully, these 6 punctuation marks. You just really need to memorize this order, is the acronym for this, and then this process is what we've gone over this entire video, so it should be pretty intuitive, hopefully. And then now let's actually do stuff. So it's going to be hard for me to find questions that I don't remember at all. It's pretty much impossible because I've seen like every grammar question that was ever made by College Board. So I don't think ever made because there's a lot of actual questions that I haven't seen, but you get the idea. So it's really hard. So I just selected a few questions that I recognize to be an all-encompassing representative of what you would normally see in the SAT. At least for punctuation questions, specifically like harder questions that would see in a hard module. I did pick some easy questions too. And how we're going to do this is I'm going to show a question. I want you to pause the video first and solve that question, and unpause the video, and I'm going to explain how I would solve this question. And you need to make sure that every single time you unpause the video and I explain how to solve the question, that's exactly what you did. Pause the video, see if you can solve this. Okay. You should have checked D first here because there's a period. So if you didn't check D first, you need to rewatch the entire video. I don't know, because that's pretty basic, right? Check D first. You look at the answer choices. Hopefully you didn't read the passage first either. You look immediately, your eyes went to the answer choices and you saw D and okay, I need to find subject and main verb before and after the period. And by the way, when I talk about like independent clause before and independent clause after, I don't think anybody has gotten this confused, but just to make this like completely clear, it's the sentence the blank is in. You have to make sure there's an independent clause somewhere here, independent clause somewhere there. If there's a sentence like over here, and you find an independent clause there, that does not matter at all, okay? It's only the sentence the blank is in. And that goes for all of punctuation. You only care about the sentence the blank is in, except for the transition placement questions. But obviously you need to find the relationship between the sentences then. But otherwise, it's always just read the sentence blank is in. Okay, so we're looking for subject and main verb. Okay, here again, like you primed your head, or I guess you primed your brain to look for subjects, like things basically. Okay, American writer, that's a subject. This person, and this is additional information immediately, right? This is about the migration. Additional information has that's a main verb, and then these do you see commas? I just want to make sure, but this seems like a list, like short stories, novels, and essays. Okay, yeah. So those commas aren't attaching this information. Notice I made sure I understood what each comma was doing in that sentence as well, just to make sure. But I found an independent clause before, and you look after the period, praising her. So if it starts with praising, it's probably non-sexual element. I'm gonna go here. Writer person has compared to the Nobel Prize. Yeah, that's easy. That's an independent clause, right? Subject, main verb. Answer is D, and you move on. And there's pretty much like 100% chance it's D anyways. If this was a second module question. Okay. Try this. Hopefully, when you solve this question, you look at the answer choices first and you immediately checked A because there's a period. And the same thing as that one. And you check for independent clause before and after. Nope, that's not a subject. This could be a subject. But yep, that's a main verb. And yeah, that's definitely independent clause before. And notice there's parentheses here. However, all the parentheses are in the exact same spot. Not like there's one parentheses here and one without a parentheses. So it's not touching on parentheses at all. You can kind of just ignore that. Okay. By researching, so that's definitely not how you start an independent clause. So I'm gonna move on. Okay, she found. Yeah, that's an independent clause. And there's no other punctuation here. Yep. Answer's A. Moving on. Okay. Even if you deviated even a tiny bit from how I solved this, you need to figure out why. And maybe you actually read this entire thing and I didn't. Why was I able to figure out that this was a supplemental information right away? Because I saw the word by researching. Like by researching, that's for sure additional information. You can just skip that. So things like that. So maybe it's just you see more practice too. But you need to figure out why. Like figure out like the gaps in knowledge that I know that you don't to help you make that difference. That's going to help you a lot, to improve a lot faster as well. Okay, so pause the video, solve this. Immediately, you should see dashes, and then we check, okay, there's a dash before and after the which, and then there's already a dash in the passage. So it seems like we just need to figure out which of these, like, should the which be before the dash or after the dash? I'm thinking it's A immediately, because I mentioned before, which starts additional information. Like it just sets up additional information. So I'm thinking which has to be part of the additional information. So I'm thinking it's A immediately. But I'm just gonna make sure. And how we can make sure is just remove the parts between the dash from the sentence and see if the sentence still makes sense. Right. Milkman's research can thus address anomalies that neoclassical economic models cannot explain. That makes perfect sense. Like the one without the which makes perfect sense. You put a which there, the neoclassical economic models which cannot explain. Yeah, that doesn't sound right to me. Like at all, by the way. Yeah. Okay. Like why is the which there? Right? That doesn't make sense. So A is perfect. Okay. Moving on. Pause the video to try this one. Okay, you should have looked at the answer choices first. Immediately saw A, and you're like, okay, there's a comma, FANBOYS. I need to make sure there's an independent clause before it, independent clause after. Where's the beginning of the sentence? Looks like it's always already at the start. Yeah, sorry, my thing's blocking the way. Okay, here we go. So yeah, it looks like it's the start from the start featuring, but that's not how you start an independent clause. So there's no way. Okay, this could be a subject. The 2021 exhibition behind the camera set out. That's a verb. Yeah, that's an independent clause. Okay. And then after, given the collection's breadth of more than sorry, that's definitely not independent clause. It's efforts, so that's the subject, the word, main verb, yeah. Independent clause, the answer is A. Okay, hopefully this is making sense. But you notice pretty much every single answer choice we checked first was correct because the priority list works super well. And I made that priority list by calculating the frequencies of which answer choice is likely to be correct. So obviously, there's way likelihood for the answer choice you pick first to be correct if you follow the priority list. Okay. Pause the video and try solving this one. So you should have looked at the answer choices immediately and saw that B or D. However, they're kind of the same. So I would first check if there's a semicolon inside the paragraph first. If there is, then it's probably going to be a D because it's going to be a semicolon this question. And if not, then you would check C next, right? And right away, we see there's definitely no semicolons here. There's no ways a semicolon this question. So we can eliminate B and D immediately. Do the exact same thing because they're the period and semicolon do the exact same thing. Obviously, assuming a semicolon isn't separating items within a semicolon list. So they do the exact same thing and they're the exact same place. So they're the same thing. We can eliminate both of them. Okay, C. For C, there has to be non-essential element somewhere before or after it that's attaching to the rest of the sentence. So I'm just going to make sure that's what's happening. While one requires oxygen, yeah, that's definitely additional information. Aerobic and anaerobic respiration are both, yeah. So that's the subject, and R is the main verb here. So that's an independent clause. So this seems like it's just additional information attaching to this, right? And it seems like that's just like a colon dash thing. I think it's fine. Okay. Hopefully that makes sense. Pause the video and try solving this. You should have just picked C. You should have just looked at the answer choices, picked C, and moved on. It's a title and name question. There's the profession and the name. That's the title and the name. Okay, that was pretty easy. And if you weren't able to recognize that, it's because you're not looking for title name actively. And like I mentioned before earlier on, I think a great way to circumvent this is when you're going to grammar questions first, just look for all the title name questions and address them first before you even go on to the rest of the grammar questions. Because then you force yourself to actively look for them and it helps a lot. Okay. Pause the video and try solving this question. Okay, hopefully you solved it by now. What I would do is look at the answer choices and I see a bunch of semicolons. I'm already very certain it's a semicolon list question just because of how many semicolons there are in the passage. So immediately in my head, I'm like, okay, I need to look at the last item of the semicolon and figure out the structure that all the other items should match. And then I'm just going to match it accordingly and figure out like, where should the semicolons be, where should the commas be according to the last item in this list. So I'm looking for the semicolon and yeah, so it seems like something Rosetta Stone course in this in a date. So it seems like the date has to be at the end, right? And then it has to be comma right before the word end. So in some date has to be comma right before that. And there has to be like some description before the comma. So it seems to be the same case for this item too. So I need to make sure I pick the answer choice with a semicolon after the date. Oh, it's just C then. right? This is the only one that has a semicolon after the date. That was super easy. Answer C, because we want the items to end after the date, just like this one, just like how this one ends right after the date. Okay, is this the last one? Yeah, this is the last one. Okay, last one, try solving this question. Pause the video. And we look for independent clause before and some kind of expanded thought right after the colon, or expanding on what was before the colon. This type of, there's no verb in here. Okay, so that's not an independent clause, obviously. Okay, and that way we can eliminate D too, right? Because there's no independent clause before. Then we check B next, so that's the priority list. And for B to be correct, there has to be a non-essential element somewhere before or after it to attach the rest of the sentence. Okay, this type of random continuous movement, which is known as Brownian motion. Okay, so you see the which, by the way, it's probably going to be, yeah, there probably should be a comma there. Now, I kind of want to address this. I never went over this. This comma, if you were confused why this comma is here, they don't actually test you on this, but it does show up in the passage. It's super rare though, but I just want to bring up this thing just in case. Let's say I want to try to describe somebody, and I want to say that they're cool and funny. Okay, I'm going to say Bob. Bob, cool and funny Bob. Okay, this is one way to say it. There's another way you can say it. Instead of putting an and here, you just put a comma here. So this is perfectly fine too. Again, you won't ever see this tested in the answer choices, but you might see it in the passage, so don't get confused if you do see it. So like this type of random continuous. So there's just two adjectives, and they just, instead of just putting the and here, they just use the comma, and it's still grammatically correct. Random continuous. So this comma isn't here because of non-essential elements at all, actually. Cool. Yeah, so and then I'm gonna make sure, yeah, so this is, the comma is ending there, right? So this comma to this comma, that is non-essential element, which is additional information about the continuous movement, right? Because it tells that there's another name for this movement. And that's what the additional information is about. Cool, can be observed, yeah, so the movement can be observed, that's the subject and main verb. Okay, yeah. Hopefully that makes sense, and this should have helped you understand how I solve grammar questions, and also we went over this new type of comma that you probably didn't know before, and now you know. Hopefully this video helped.